Our guests are Mark Toth, national security and foreign policy expert, as well as Łukasz Fyderek, director of the Institute for the Near and Far East at Jagiellonian University. Good evening, sirs.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Right, let me start by asking you about this retaliation move from Israel against Iran. So what sort of response should we expect from Israel? And if it should be the very same, like an eye for an eye response, we know that Iran has no such sophisticated system of air defense as Israel does. I'm talking, of course, about the Iron Dome. So should we expect to be it a way more bloody than it was in case of the attack on Israel? Mark Toth.
Apologize. I thought you were having your other guest answer that first. From my perspective, and I'm obviously looking at it from an American perspective, but also someone who has lived in Israel back in the 1980s, I do believe that Israel has to reestablish deterrence in the Middle East against Iran. I don't think that you can allow this kind of attack that goes the breadth of the country, that hits the Nevatim Air Base in the Negev, where sensitive F-35 stealth fighters are stationed, go unanswered. Iran was clearly out to try and create casualties. I don't think this is something that Jerusalem can just excuse. And I believe if they do that, then simply they're greenlighting Iran at a time where they're choosing to go at it once again when they feel it's in their interest to do so. So if you're going to stop that, if you're going to prevent Iran from basically controlling the initiative, Israel has to respond, and in my opinion, has to respond directly against Iran.
Yet, Joe Biden said that Israel should consider their ability, right, to defend themselves, of course, with American and also British help, a success. So I guess he was trying to convince Mr. Netanyahu not to retaliate. I believe that a lot of people are very worried at the moment. Also, we have Iraqi Prime Minister visiting the White House, right? So everyone is quite worried about what could happen in the region. Dr. Fyderek, what is your take on this?
Well, from what we've seen, most probable answer of Israeli military will be the airstrike on Iranian facilities. It'll be a quite difficult operations, taking into account the distance and the number of forces, particularly fighter jets, as well as refueling planes, which will need to be employed on such a strike. But looking into Israeli strategic culture, I would say that this deterrence by retaliation or deterrence by punishment is something which characterized that strategic culture over the years and decades. So what Joe Biden is trying to spin or trying to argue that Israel should be okay with deterrence by denial, by the fact that it succeeded shutting down Iranian drones and missiles, is something which goes contrary to what we've seen over the course of history of Israeli security apparatus. Having said that, we need to understand that it is we are at the extremely dangerous point, since the balance of power between Israel and Iran, in my opinion, has been shifting towards Iran. Iran has been empowered over the recent years. There are a lot of reasons for that. One of them is bad policy and a number of foreign policy mistakes and security policy mistakes done by the Netanyahu government. So we are in a dangerous moment in the history, since Iran may not be deterred and may retaliate. So here we are entering the spiral of violence. Why it may do it? Because I can't see the Israeli capabilities to destroy Iranian retaliatory potential. I can't see the potential of the Israeli action to destroy all missile sites, missile bunkers, and entrenched bases where the Islamic Republic held its missile potential and drone potential. Hence, since they won't be able to destroy it, the retaliation after retaliation may come, and will end up in that vicious circle.
Right, that very famous Fordow facility, right?
Yeah. Well, we know it's a powder keg which explodes from time to time. But the question is, if it comes to the worst, which countries of the region would get involved directly in the conflict? Dr. Fyderek.
Well, what I see among the Arabic countries is the direct or very direct communication that they won't be involved in neither side of the conflict, that they are unwilling to join neither side of the conflict. That's due to a number of factors, both internal politics. Neither country is very popular among the predominantly Arab Sunni populations, neither Shia Persian Iran, neither Jewish Israel. So none of those countries is extremely popular. Of course, what we had, and it was interesting, you referred to that in your earlier material, that we had a couple of countries defending the airspace, particularly Jordan, probably Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, against Iranian drones and missiles. But of course, those countries were defending their own airspaces, and they will probably defend it against any other threat. Well, of course, case of Jordan here is their position is more I would say volatile in that respect, but when it comes to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they won't allow, I believe, also the Israeli planes crossing their airspace. So the Arabic countries, they don't want to be catch in between in that conflict, and they are unwilling to join neither side of the conflict.
Right, especially countries like Jordan, right, which sees itself as a peacemaker trying to keep the balance. But Mr. Toth, I wanted to take a closer look at what's going on in Israel, because the war cabinet, right, if I'm not mistaken, is comprised of Benjamin Netanyahu, then we have Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and the former head of Israeli military, Benny Gantz. But the relations between these guys are not the best, right? And sort of, are internal politics a factor in how and when Israel responds? And sort of, if you could shed some light on that.
Sure. I think if we look at high altitude, politics is driving a lot of this, not only inside of Israel, with what we saw, the protests that were just occurring en masse before on that very Saturday that Iran struck, but also the November politics here in the United States. They are taking a toll in terms of the calculus that the administration itself has, the Biden administration has, in terms of how it would like to see this play out. From that standpoint, in terms of the presidential election that's upcoming, Biden wants this to kind of tamp down. He doesn't need another widespread regional war going on. He's already got that in Ukraine. I would argue, however, that regional war is probably already here. It certainly was upped the ante-wise on Saturday. So I don't know how much of that will be delayed. Now, in my view, and I find this somewhat ironic, is I've been scratching my head why, given all of the global but also domestic pressure that Netanyahu is under, I've been scratching my head as to why Khamenei would choose to strike Israel directly. What caused him to change his modus operandi of using his proxies in the past to get at Israel and to basically, essentially, implement a death by 1,000 cuts. So as I contemplate that, as I look at it, it almost makes me wonder if Khamenei is thinking that Netanyahu's survival somehow plays to his benefit. Khamenei knows at this point, absent any kind of nuclear deterrent, he can't ultimately win a war against Israel, given Israel's own nuclear capacity. And he may feel like the domestic strife that was ongoing prior to his striking on Saturday may be the best avenue forward for Iran, so that in his mind, I disagree with him. I think Israel's a much stronger country than he's giving it credit for. But in his mind, that Israel somehow would fall into internal chaos, or to allude to Abraham Lincoln, a house divided, that it somehow would fall and collapse upon itself. So from that standpoint, Israeli politics certainly are key and certainly will be a factor in all of this. But, and I think your other guests can probably speak better to that than I can. I do believe at high altitude, Israelis in general understand the nature of the fight they're in, and ultimately, on a collective basis, they'll make the right decision. I mean, I think there's this, I know at least in the United States, this presumption that a prime minister kind of had dictatorial policies, but we know in Israel there is concerted effort to debate the responses that Israel has in its war cabinet. It's often been cantankerous over history. I suspect, can't know that personally right now, that that's ongoing. But I do believe at the end of the day, Israel will get it as right as they possibly can, given the political climate. Not ideal. And certainly I know many in Israel would prefer a different group of leadership than's presently in place.
Right, Mark, you said that Israel doesn't need, that the US, or in particular Biden's administration, doesn't need any more conflicts worldwide, right, now that they have Ukraine. But then we have these assurances from the Israeli government that in case of a retaliatory attack from Israel, nothing bad will happen with its allies in the region. Then, on the other hand, we have Tehran's assurances of the very opposite scenario. And lastly, Tehran also promised to retaliate on the US if it helps the Israeli attack. But the US has already helped Israel with protecting its airspace during the latest retaliatory attack from Tehran. Therefore, should we expect any more attacks on American bases in the region, or maybe even in the US mainland?
Certainly Iran, Israel, and the United States are on an escalation ladder. How far they climb up that ladder remains to be seen. Certainly there's probably horse trading going on right now between Washington and Tehran in terms of whether or not American troops get involved. It is noticed that, I do take note of, over the last several months, the attacks that were abundant on U.S. forces in Syria, Iraq, and Jordan, the one Tower 22 in Jordan, subsided, and you did see the U.S. giving some sanctions relief, or the releasing of frozen funds would be a better way of putting it. So there is that, and whether or not Khomeini wants to play that card in terms of revoking that understanding and striking out at U.S. forces directly, it remains to be seen. I don't think it would be wise. Because the U.S., I think at that point would then be forced to retaliate. Certainly Americans would want to see that happen. And right now, at least, he has Biden calling for Israel to step back. Now, from Israel's standpoint, it's a different equation. They're certainly going to want to be looking at what best reestablishes deterrence and gets Iran to stop attacking Israel in the future. And how that plays out is just a whole different ballgame and equation.
Let me just ask one final question to Dr. Fyderek. I was actually wondering, because all eyes are on Gaza and, of course, on Israel, but I wonder what's happening in the West Bank, because there are reports of growing violence there. So is it another hotspot? Can we expect something major happening there? What is your take on that?
Well, with the all eyes on Gaza, the events on the West Bank are not encouraging for the future peaceful development of Israeli-Palestinian relations, because on one hand we have highly corrupted authoritarian leadership of Mahmoud Abbas. And on the other, we have military administration of Israel, which is more and more being hijacked by the settler colonialist movement. And particularly after the terrorist attack of 7 October, the animosity, to put it mildly, between Jewish citizens of Israel being settlers on the West Bank and the local population, Palestinian population. This animosity has grown exponentially. So we have a number of incidents which are not widely reported. You may find them on the UN reports or local press. They are more widely reported in the Arabic world, of course, of different kind of abuses against Palestinians. And then on top of that, you have not only West Bank, you have Eastern Jerusalem, where you have evictions of Palestinian families from their homes, and this process is ongoing. So unfortunately, due to the polarized nature of politics in Israel, we see here a very conflict-prone situation in the West Bank.
Unfortunately. So Łukasz Fyderek, Director of the Institute for the Near and Far East at the Jagiellonian University, and Mark Toth, National Security and Foreign Policy Expert, were our guests tonight.
Thank you, Ses, for your time and for your insight.